Nice to see you all. So today we're talking about establishing your research identity or your researcher identity using researcher profile tools. And this is the final workshop in the graduate student research series. So hopefully you're able to attend a few of the previous ones. And yeah, we'll talk more about that later. My name is Carolyn Monin. I'm a health sciences librarian at Bannatyne campus. And with me is Justin. I'll let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Carolyn. And yeah, I'm Justin Pure. I work at the Sciences Library, Jim Peebles Science and Technology Library at the Fort Garry campus.
So today we'll be talking about the benefits of researcher profile systems, and certainly the benefits of each of the different researcher profile systems, the different types of them, how they connect with one another and how you can connect them to different tools, how you can use them to highlight your work and any tips on augmenting your profile. And then at the end, we have a self-reflection exercise where you can sort of think through which researcher profile system will work best for you and your ultimate goals. So you may have noticed that as you entered the room that we are recording, but as I mentioned at the beginning, if you weren't here, the recording will only be whoever's speaking, so my face or Justin's face, and the slides, your names will not be included. Thank you, Justin, for putting the workshop slides in the chat so you can follow along and see the content. So our objectives today, by the end of the session, we hope that you'll be able to identify the key resources available to help you track, measure, and visualize your impact, assess the researcher profile systems and their key features, and finally compare and contrast the different profile systems. All right, so some benefits of researcher profile systems. It's a long phrase, so I might just shorten it to RPS if just to save us some time. But so RPS is they highlight and promote your work ultimately. So they allow you to showcase your work in one designated area. Some highlight your peer-reviewed journals that you've published, your articles. Some highlight your peer review activity. Others highlight your grants. There's profile systems that highlight non-published materials. So it's really just a tool to demonstrate all the work that you've done, and then sometimes also highlight some of your background information. You know, we're all Googling one another, so this is just the opportunity to kind of control the information that is out there in the Google results page about you. And then also it really helps to ensure that your work is attributed to you. So our names are not unique and they can change during our career for a variety of reasons. So researcher profile systems link you to a number, so that a unique number, so that you know, that number gets attached to the metadata of whatever you're publishing, and then it correctly attributes that work to you. And that means also that your citation numbers and your metrics are also correct. It helps you distinguish yourself from other authors, and then it helps you connect with people who share your research interests or are in similar disciplines as yourself. So there are two different types of RPSs. There are the social networking researcher systems, profile systems, and then the academic ones. So the social networking ones are as they sound. So they promote your work and collaborations. They're about getting reads, right? So if you have a new article, it sends that out to everyone in your network that you're friends with, that you've published this new article, and helps you get reads. You can also sometimes upload your open access articles to those systems so that people can actually read it. They can request to read your work too, so you can choose to upload it if you wish, although there's some caveats with that, right? Make sure that you're allowed to do that. They're typically opt-in systems, so you sign up for it, and it does not use a number to identify you. It uses an email or your name. Academic RPSs are slightly different. Their purpose is to correctly attribute your work. They usually have some kind of metric involved in them. And then they also help to promote all your work. So not just your published output, but your non-published output. They can sometimes be self-managed, but sometimes they're automated. And they almost always use a number to identify you. There is, that's not always the case, but for the most part they do. So today we're going to be focusing more on the academic RPSs, like Scopus, like Google Scholar, Web of Science Researcher ID, and ORCID. So the social networking apps, RPSs would be more like the ResearchGate, academia.edu, Humanities Commons, and Loop. So we're probably all familiar with ResearchGate, right? That is a social networking tool that allows you to connect with people and you can promote your work. Whereas the academic ones really focus more on your published and non-published output and ensuring that your academic background and academic work is highlighted. So the 4 different types are ORCID, Scopus ID, Web of Science Researcher ID, and Google Scholar citations. So ORCID is a really flexible system that gives you a number and you have full control over your profile. Its main purpose is author disambiguation, which just means ensuring that your work is attributed to you. So it provides you with a permanent identifier. Scopus is an author profile that is organized and maintained directly within the Scopus database, which is a subscription database. You have access to it now as you're affiliated with the University of Manitoba. But you do need that library subscription in order to access it. The ID for your Scopus ID is assigned internally. Web of Science Researcher ID is very similar to Scopus ID, so it's an ID assigned internally. But what the nice thing about Web of Science is you can also track your peer review and editorial contributions. And then Google Scholar Citations is the author profile system within the Google Scholar database. So some reasons to use each of the 4. So ORCID is a very flexible system and lots of other systems integrate well with ORCID. So, grant applications, journal submissions, you see it more and more where if you're submitting to a journal, first they make you sign in with your ORCID. So that's just to verify that some of that your information is automated and less room for errors. You can also link your ORCID to your U of M login, which just allows easier access. Scopus also allows for disambiguation in Scopus, so it ensures that the work that is indexed, so it has been uploaded to Scopus, your work in Scopus is attributed to you. Scopus also has the author metric system like H-index, so it just ensures your H-index is correct. And then Scopus also integrates with ORCID. Similarly, Web of Science integrates with ORCID. It allows disambiguation in Web of Science, and it tracks and verifies your peer review. Google Scholar Citation is more popular in the humanities and social sciences due to their very expansive indexing, which just means Google Scholar typically over-indexes. So sometimes you'll see in a Google Scholar profile the same paper twice, and that's because it's been indexed from different sources. There is the option for a private account in Google Scholar. And I should also mention too, ORCID allows some privacy options as well. Google Scholar also has their own H-index, and then they have their I-10 index. So some of these RPSs are more self-managed and some are automated. So ORCID would be one where you need to participate a bit more to make sure that your ORCID profile is up to date. A lot of information in ORCID you manually input yourself. You can, with your articles, get automated updates, but you have to give permission to certain sites to do that. We'll get into that in just a little bit. But because you're participating more, you also have more control over what's shared. On the other side, Google Scholar, Scopus, and Web of Science, they're more passive. So Scopus and Web of Science in particular, it's more difficult to change your profiles within these databases because they're organized internally by these databases. Google Scholar, you can request to remove or add a paper. So there's a bit more flexibility there. And with Google Scholar too, you have some options on on the personal information that you share, like your interests and where you work or go to school. But for the most part, you're not participating as much with those systems. Okay, so let's have a closer look at ORCID. Okay, so ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. It's a nonprofit organization that works to maintain unique and permanent researcher identifiers. It also kind of works as a database, so you can search for people for their ORCID and see what their profiles look like. It's free. It's an opt-in system, so you need to register for an ORCID in order to obtain it. So every time you register, when you register, you receive a 16-digit unique identifier to identify you, and that's the number that you use when you are submitting your papers or when you're trying to get access to your account. The nice thing with ORCID is it supports over 37 different types of work. And by that, I mean you can post your conference posters or conference presentations. If you have patents, you can put them in. Really, it just allows for a lot more flexibility rather than just sharing journal articles. It's trying to demonstrate all the different work that we put in academia. It's a very flexible system, and that's why you see it with so many publishers and institutions and how they've integrated it. But essentially, it's a virtual CV. So you can put your education and your work and any memberships you have. You can put much more information about who you are in your ORCID. And then you also control your visibility. So you get to decide which sections of your ORCID are public and which are private. So this is the back end of my profile. So these red dots here, that means that that information is not shared publicly. So that's my emails. I don't share those on the public site, but I have my name. I can put a biography there if I'd like. Biography is a good opportunity to kind of share your research interests. And if you have scholarships and that sort of thing, what you've done so far in your career. And then you would list your employment and your education, etc. I've also linked my Scopus account to my ORCID, so people can click on that and access my Scopus ID. And then there's a variety of other categories that you would have in your ORCID. Maybe let's just take a quick look. So employment's there, education and qualifications, professional activities, funding. So if I had grants, I would put that there. And then my works are there as well. We do have this checklist, which I highly recommend. Justin, would you mind putting the link to that in the chat, please? But this checklist that Justin and I created, it kind of walks you through how to register for an account and then how to fill out your ORCID to give you a really robust profile. It is a problem with ORCID. We see people register and then they're empty profiles. So because they're empty, we can't confirm that that's you. And so in order to really get the most out of your ORCID, you do want to make sure that at least your education or previous employment is there, just so that people can confirm that it's you. So yeah, so employment, education, your invited position, distinctions, membership, and service, those pieces of your profile you have to enter manually. There's no way to, upload a CV and have them do it. That would be nice. But then for funding and your works, you can automate that process a bit more. And I'll show you how. So it's through this thing called search and link. So search and link gives permission to different platforms to update ORCID on your behalf. So there's a long list of places to consider. If we look back at my profile, so under works, I would go to add search and link. So there are 17 different places that I have to give permission to in order for them to update my ORCID with the information that they have in their own database. So a few to consider, Crossref would be one of the primary ones. It's a massive database of all the, it's publisher supplied metadata. So it just has a huge amount of journal articles. I typically find Crossref of all of these that I've given access to is the fastest at updating my, my new articles to my profile. So Crossref is one. DataCite would be another if you work with data and are and open data and are adding your data to different databases. Scopus is another one. So that would work with the Scopus database. So anything that's in your Scopus would be updated in your ORCID. And then the Lens is a newer one that is an open database, very similar to Crossref, but it also includes patents. So that would be a good platform and an interesting one. So I haven't given permission to the Lens yet, so I thought I would show you what that looks like. So if I click on the Lens, so it's asking for access to grant the Lens access to update the account on my behalf. So I have to authorize access. I can always take that access away if I want to, but first I must give them access. So now this is what the Lens looks like. They're going to look through their database for works that I've co-authored and that they can add to my ORCID. So that's one of the ways that you can kind of automate the process, which makes it handy, but you still do need to kind of, just like you would with a CV, make sure that all your work is added. Especially this is the case with like conference abstracts, anything that might not be in those databases that might not be given a DOI would need to be manually added. Okay, so Scopus ID, you would access via the library. Actually, Justin, if you could put the link for Scopus, that would be great. So Scopus is a very large database. It's multidisciplinary, so it has articles from health sciences to arts and humanities. It's one of the biggest databases we have access to. So anytime you publish an article and it's indexed within Scopus, meaning it's uploaded to the Scopus database, you Scopus internally creates a Scopus ID for you. However, your account or your profile is not accessible until you've published at least 2 articles that are indexed in Scopus. So Scopus ID can only be used within Scopus, and it can be integrated with your ORCID so that your ORCID gets updated with your Scopus information. What's nice about Scopus is they do have the citation metrics if that's important to you. So, they have the H-index citation metric, and they also have the document and citation analysis. So there are issues sometimes where the same author will have multiple identifiers created. So you can go in and merge your account if you need, or merge those accounts if you need to. And when you do that, you also confirm authorship on certain articles. So it's possible to remove articles from your profile if you didn't co-author them or author them. So this is what the profile, the page looks like, the author page. So this is Dr. Aoki's profile page, and on the left-hand side are his metrics, and then in the center you have the number of publications per year that he's published that are in Scopus. Remember, this is just for documents within Scopus, so not necessarily everything that is published. And then his topics of interest are on the right-hand side. And this number at the top here, that is the his Scopus ID number. Okay, researcher profiles from Web of Science, very similar to Scopus, as I mentioned. It was previously called Publons, but it merged with Web of Science in August 2022. And the nice thing with Web of Science researcher profiles is that not only does it highlight the articles that you have that are indexed within Web of Science, but also your peer review activities. So if you've ever done a peer review, so the publishing system or the submission system will ask you, do you want us to update your profile with Web of Science researcher profiles with this peer review? So you can say yes and grant it access. And then that means that your peer review of the journal, not the journal article, right? We don't want people knowing the article that you peer reviewed, but it does indicate the journal that you peer reviewed for. It also has its own citation information. So Web of Science does its own H-index, and then the citing articles, the number of times your article has been cited as well. So this is Justin's profile in researcher profiles. Here is his researcher ID. It also does have his organizations, the affiliations from his published article appear, which is nice because then you can confirm that it's actually him. On the first page here are his publications that are within Web of Science. And then if you clicked on this peer review tab, it would have his peer review activity. All right, and finally, Google Scholar Citations. So Google Scholar Citations doesn't give you a number like the other academic sites, but it gives you, you have to verify through your work email, through your university email, that this is you. You also need a Google account in order to start the process. So it doesn't create a profile for you internally until you turn it on, essentially, until you opt into the system. And then once you do, then you get your Google Scholar citation page. You can decide to make your profile private, but then no one, it's not like ORCID where pieces of it can be private. Google Scholar means it looks as though you didn't even opt into an account. But for some people, they just kind of want to keep track of their own metrics within Google Scholar, so that makes sense. So Google Scholar, you can edit your name, affiliation, your areas of interest, your email, and your homepage. You can also add a picture of yourself if you like to. Google Scholar is not integrated with ORCID, but what you can do is export your ORCID articles in a BibTeX and then upload it to Google Scholar. However, as we mentioned, because Google Scholar over-indexes so much, it's very unlikely that you'd have any publication missing from your Google Scholar citation page. They do their own metrics again. They do their own each index, and then they do an I-10 index. So that's the number of papers that have been cited at least 10 times within Google Scholar. And then there's a link there on the different U of M faculty who have profile pages. But here I wanted to show you Dr. Wang. So this is what the Google Scholar profile page looks like. We have his affiliation, his university affiliation. We have the articles that have been indexed within Google Scholar, number of times they've been cited, and the year they were published. When you click on these numbers, you can see the articles that have cited it. On the right-hand side here, we have the metric information. So we have the total number of citations, H-index, and I-10 index. And then you have that same information in the last 5 years, which is nice to see. And then you have the open access versus subscription access of their articles. So those are the 4 different academic researcher profile sites. I'm going to pass it on to Justin now to continue with the presentation.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. Okay, so Carolyn gave us a really good summary of each of these sites, or more of the common or more popular profile sites. But like Helen was asking in the chat, which profile do you use? Overall, we do recommend using more than one profile. It raises your profile online or impact, but also some have specific purposes. So for example, Web of Science researcher profiles tracks peer review, but Scopus does not. And you can import that Web of Science researcher profile peer review into ORCID. And I'll show you a couple of examples of how to integrate these systems. Really, to decide, you want to balance how many are manual, how many are you manually creating, how many are automatically created for you, and then how much time do you have to keep them updated. So to think about this, right, you also want to look at people in your field and see which sites they're using and which sites they're keeping up to date, and then don't have so many that you don't have time to properly manage. That's really the most important thing. And we already talked about which ones are auto-generated, which ones are user-generated, and we have a table just coming up that'll summarize all that information for you. So on this slide, me and Carolyn did some research over the past couple of years. So we actually took a sample of the entire University of Manitoba faculty, and we looked them up on each of these sites. And so this is the result of that research. So you can see how, depending on which discipline you're in, some of these sites are more popular than others. You can definitely look at Scopus. You can see how, I mean, the lowest is in arts and humanities at 61%, right? But you also need to realize Scopus is an auto-generated profile. So faculty members aren't going out and having to create this manually. But it really helps you get an idea of which ones are popular for which disciplines. And if you need the discipline breakdown of how me and Carolyn categorize this, you can ask. Or, yeah, you just look at this table and kind of figure out which ones are more popular than others. You can go to the next slide, Carol. Okay, so this table, actually both of these tables will be included in the worksheet that we'll pass around in just a couple minutes. So if you need to reference this material later, you'll have it. But this just gives a really broad overview on a lot of what Carolyn was talking about for ORCID and Google Scholar and Scopus and Web of Science. It lets you just quickly look at, okay, which ones let you put in what are called like alternative scholarly works or non-traditional research outputs. So you can quickly look at all of those, which ones allow you to do that, to put onto a profile. And you can quickly look, okay, only ORCID lets me put on like a conference poster that wasn't like properly published anywhere, right? So you can put that in ORCID, and you can go through the rest of those and look at those. Okay. So the one thing to really realize is, well, there's a couple things you can realize with this presentation, but one thing to really keep in mind is these systems work together. Well, pieces of them work together, and pieces of them work together with some of the systems we're talking about. Overall, a lot of the systems integrate into ORCID. So especially Scopus and Web of Science work very well with ORCID. So you can feed these two systems that are auto-generated, right, in Scopus and Web of Science, and you can authorize them in much the same way that Carolyn was just saying, and that she demonstrated with the lens, to update your ORCID profile automatically. So it saves you a bit of time in case you miss something. It'll get added to your profile if you allow these systems to integrate. We can go to the next slide. So this is kind of a high-level overview on what exactly you can feed into ORCID. First, on the left-hand side, so you can see in Web of Science, you get your auto-generated account created. You can claim it. And then you can actually feed this information down into ORCID. So you can tell ORCID all of your peer review. You can, if you're involved in any editorial contributions in scholarly journals, you can feed that down into ORCID. And then anything that the Web of Science database has indexed in its system, you can also feed that into ORCID as well. So you published, you published 12 articles that are in Web of Science, they're on your profile, rather than having to look all those up individually, and then as you're publishing, continually update, you can just authorize Web of Science to do that directly into ORCID. Scopus, much the same way. Anything that you can find in Scopus that's been attributed to you, so you've authored it, and it's in Scopus, you can send that to your ORCID profile too. Exactly the same way as you would with Carolyn's description or demonstration of the lens. And then if you look at that ORCID checklist form that we had circulated earlier, that has explicit instructions on how to go through this process. But if you have any questions, for sure, reach out to Carolyn or myself, and we can help you out. The other thing to know about is you can feed, or information goes from the U of M Library's MSpace, which is our institutional repository. So master's students will know MSpace very well because it's a condition of their graduation that they need to submit their thesis online to MSpace before they can graduate. That information actually gets sent to Google Scholar, and Google Scholar puts it in its database automatically, and it's there. And if you have a Google Scholar profile, it'll appear that information or reports or whatever you've uploaded to MSpace will appear on your Google Scholar profile. So we covered MSpace in some of these other graduate student research series workshops, but basically, well, the big one for grad students at least is theses, right? And dissertations as well. I don't know if every dissertation goes in there. Other things throughout your undergrad, you may have completed something called a capstone or maybe an honors thesis, depending on what program you're in. Those sometimes go into MSpace as well. So then maybe you've submitted that, you've written one, you've submitted it to MSpace. And if you created a Google Scholar profile, that thesis will be on your profile already. And then some of these other things too, preprints, open access articles, presentations, posters, reports. One thing that someone mentioned in one of the earlier sessions last week is they didn't know you could upload conference posters to MSpace, and you can actually. So if you presented a poster pretty much anywhere, like if there was some kind of undergrad poster competition, or as part of your graduate program, you presented a poster at a conference, feel free to take an image of that and you can upload that into MSpace, and then you can make your Google Scholar profile or add it to your ORCID profile. Okay, we can go to the next slide. You also want to think about, oh, that's great. Yeah. Adam writes, after hearing this, I uploaded a poster to MSpace. Thanks. Exactly, that's perfect. Using the system as it's intended to. That's awesome. You also, when you're making an ORCID profile, even if you have made one already, or if you're thinking about doing one, highly suggest using your U of M institutional account. This is what the page looks like. So when you click on register in ORCID, you have this option between making a personal account or an institutional account. Highly recommend using your institutional U of M account. You can also add a backup email. So you can add your Gmail account to your account as well. You can hide it just like Carolyn did. But that lets you access the account even after you graduated. Okay. So highlighting your work. So you want to remember that you can add academic, but you can also add non-academic work to your ORCID profile. Non-academic work can take a number of different forms. Sometimes people use that to refer to non-peer-reviewed. But basically anything that you feel like would fit on your ORCID profile, there's options to add it to your ORCID account. It's also important to keep your ORCID profile up to date. So if you have incorrect institutional affiliations on there, so let's say you used to go to the University of Alberta, but you don't anymore, and now you're at U of M, you just want to keep that up to date. It's hard to tell who you are if that information is not correct. Also, if you have outdated publications and scholarly work, it's not really showcasing your full research impact. That's why we always stress keep your profiles up to date and keep as many profiles created as you can manage them or maintain them to display accurate information. So some profile tips. So if you're an early career researcher, think about adding more details about where you've worked, who your advisors are, what kind of peer review you've done, any conference presentations. If you're an established researcher, you want to add service work such as peer reviewing and make sure to include all name variations from past publications. Okay, adding peer review. So in Web of Science, you can turn on, this is what it looks like in Web of Science, where if you go to your profile settings, there's something called ORCID syncing. And so you can check off at the bottom, update my peer reviews in ORCID. First, you would need to link your ORCID account. So that's my ORCID number there. So I already went through that process. You can, this will add it automatically to ORCID as long as Web of Science has an accurate records of your peer review. In ORCID, you can also add it manually as well. And same with Web of Science. You can, if something hasn't been automated, you can add it to your Web of Science profile. We just wanted to mention that you can add Google Scholar works to ORCID with something called BibTeX files. This is kind of there's a few more steps to this. If you really wanted to add Google Scholar works, maybe you have more works in Google Scholar or maybe something that isn't in Scopus or Web of Science. So in Google, you first need to export all of those works from Google Scholar. Sorry, excuse me. You can select export them in BibTeX format. Then you need to go into the works section of your ORCID profile and you can select add BibTeX. And you can upload all of those BibTeX files directly into your ORCID account. It's a little bit more, there's a few more steps, but it is something that is possible to do. Okay. Oh, Helen has a question here. For a lot of students and researchers that weren't born in Canada and may have a legal name and an English name that they go by, which name would you recommend using for these profiles? So in most systems, there you can add multiple names. Carolyn, do you have ORCID open already? Yeah, it's in one of those tabs there.
I do, yes. Let me just open it.
Okay, so you can add
Also known as here.
also known as, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Also known as. So you can add additional names to this profile. So you can choose for yourself in ORCID what is going to be kind of like the primary name or the default name that people will see at the top of the profile. And then if you add in additional names here, they'll appear, I think, just in another field, just in that first little section. Yeah, names section.
It's right underneath here. Yeah. So right underneath
some people,
here. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, some people put in, yeah, exactly. They may have a legal name and then an English name, or maybe Carolyn publishes using like C, just an initial C monin. Some people will put that in there. In Scopus, it'll really depend on what name you used when you published the article. And if you've used different names to publish different articles in Scopus or Web of Science, you can choose which is going to be the primary name. Scopus doesn't have a really nice, I don't think it has, or Web of Science has a nice, like also known as option, but you can choose yourself if you claim your account in those systems. Okay. Carolyn and I made a self-reflection exercise. So she put the link in the chat, in the Zoom chat. So this basically is 5 short questions. Sorry, excuse me. And it'll guide you through what profiles you want to create, and just get you to think about which of these profiles you'd want to focus on. So you can see it asks what your discipline is, and then gets you to rank kind of the most important scholarly aspects that you're thinking about. And then on the second page, it'll have that table that we'd already shown you. And most of those questions kind of track to information on the table. And then so you can decide, right, do I want ORCID and Scopus, or do I want ORCID and Google Scholar? And we'll give you maybe 5 minutes.
Hopefully that exercise just allowed you an opportunity to think about which of the profile systems will work well in your life and discipline. Okay, let me just share the slides. All right, so thank you so much for attending. That's all the content we have for you now, but we're very happy to answer any questions you might have. Also, if you have the chance to fill out the evaluation form, thank you, Justin, for putting that in the chat. This is the new series, and actually this session, we've reorganized it a little bit. And so any feedback, negative or positive, that you have would be really helpful to help us plan for future sessions. And one last thing to mention is that we librarians, we are very familiar with these researcher profile systems, and so if you need support in setting them up or helping to manage them, or just want to know a bit more about them, please contact your liaison librarian, or you can contact myself or Justin, and we can kind of help you help set you up. So unfortunately, this is the last of the 6 sessions of the Graduate Student Research Series, but we hope you've enjoyed them for those that were able to attend. And yeah, we hope to repeat this again in the future. So if there are any topics that you would like us to cover. Again, if you could fill that out in the evaluation form, that would be very, very helpful. Again, we have the links to the ORCID checklist and the reflection worksheet, and also the slides, workshop slides, which are in the chat. And we can certainly add those to the chat again if you've missed them. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed today's session. And if you have any questions, Justin and I are happy to answer them for you.